Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhigyaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yatsuraya Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Svena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukad Amritadrava Sanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. We now enter the 15th chapter of the 6th Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the story of Chitraketu. So we saw this king Chitraketu who was desiring for a son. He had a son. He was extremely happy. Then he lost the son and he became extremely sad, completely lost in grief. The whole kingdom is lost in grief. And at that time we saw that Angira and Narada, they walked to his palace. So now we continue. So King Chitraketu, who was lying there by the side of his child, like he was himself a dead man, he couldn't even get up. He was so overwhelmed. And the sages, out of great compassion, Angira and Narada, were led right there to where he was on the floor. We saw Chitraketu when Angira came last time that he got up and he welcomed him and he did all the right ways of welcoming a sage, giving him a good seat, cleaning his feet and offering him good articles of worship and all the rest. So he is a very cultured king and he is very devoted, and yet he had to go through this suffering and therefore he is unable to even get up, and he has also been partially blinded as we saw because of this grief. So he is there completely lost in this grief, and Angira and Narada speak to him and they speak very powerful words of wisdom to enlighten him and to take him out of this grief. So they say, first right away they ask him, who do you think this boy is who has died? What is his relation to you? You are grieving for him, but who is he now? Who was he before he was born? And who will he be after he is gone? And same with you. So they say, Koyam syat tava Rajendra bhavanyam anushochati. You are grieving for this boy. Just think what is there. Who was there before he was born? And who is there now? Then they say very powerful instruction which is quoted many times. They say, just as in the river we see that different particles collect together through the force of the waves of the river, they go together for some time and then they again through another wave part ways. Similarly, they say it is that people are brought together and they are separated by time. The verse is very beautiful and it's very powerful, it's very evocative too. The verse is Yatha prayanti sanyanti sroto vegena valukaha samyujyante vyujyante tatha kalena dehinaha. So we can envision this in the river, in the beautiful flow of Mother Ganga or any river. There may be various particles, there may be leaves, there may be twigs, there may be small pebbles, and then there are things that are floating, wooden pieces and so on. They all seem to be, there is a bunch floating together here and there, and then there is a wave, and then they are all split apart in one moment, and then they again form a different group, and then they are floating for some more time, and then they are again split apart by the next wave. So this is the beautiful evocative metaphor the great sages Narada and Angira give. This is, they say exactly what time does. Time is like the flow of the river, and every once in a while, as the river has some forceful wave, time also every once in a while has some forceful event by which people are separated. People are swimming together in time for some time, then some wave hits them either through death or through someone getting married and going off, or someone having a different job and leaving town. There are so many ways in which people get separated. And we see this not through death, but even in one's own life. One grows up with a family as a child, and there is a unit of, say, 5 or 6 people in the house. It goes on for some years, and then it never lasts. In every household, it is seen after the children turn 18 or 20 or whatever, they leave town, they go to college or they go to work, each in different direction, and that unit is finished. And then the child grows up, he gets married, he forms a new unit, and each child does the same. And the old parents, they are moved somewhere, either they go with one of the children or they go separately. So everyone is gone in different directions, and then the next unit lasts for maybe a decade or two, and then it's broken up. So this is what happens in the world. And death, of course, parts again. So that's why they say, just as particles floating in the river come together and go apart, similarly people come together and go apart by time. This is a very powerful and often quoted verse of Bhagavatam, which comes right here, and it's so profound and so hard hitting to realize the truth of it. Therefore, they say there are some seeds that fall on fertile ground and they give more seeds out, and there are some that don't. Similarly, living entities too, some give birth to children and some don't. It is all as destined by the Supreme Being. And then they say again another very powerful verse. They say, you and we and all the beings, mobile and immobile creatures, they did not exist before death, before birth. They will not exist after death, and they do not exist even now. It's a very beautiful, powerful verse again. First, the verse is Vayam cha tvam cha ye cha ime tulyakalas characharaha janma mrityor yatha paschat prang naiva adhunapi boho. They did not exist before birth. They will not exist after death. And adhunapi, they right now also they are only a concept. They don't actually exist. So what is meant here is that whatever we see, we create an image, and because of that, we carry this image, and that is the only reality we can perceive. In actuality, what is there cannot be perceived. So, the example given in Bhagavatam before also is a shirt or a dress or a piece of cloth, even made of cotton. All there is only cotton thread. The idea of a shirt or a pant or any other name is only a concept, and it's a useful concept, but in reality, what is there is only cotton thread. Similarly, what is there as man, woman, as animals, all that there is only the energy, the nature, which is prakriti, which is the energy. And even scientifically we see that all there is only atoms. If we go at the uh, atomic level, in fact there are not even atoms are made of subatomic particles. So if we inquire even scientifically and look at the essence of any human body or animals or birds or plants or anything, it really boils down to essentially just subatomic particles, which are themselves made of only empty space, and therefore they are essentially not matter at all. So, what appears as matter, what appears as substantial matter in the form of all the bodies and various entities, when we get right down to the depth of them, we don't find matter. All we find is energy, which is quantum energy, and people are still trying to figure out the source of quantum energy, which is simply pure consciousness. Therefore, we can see that all that there is only energy. Even if we simply take it at the level of energy, which all the scientists would also agree with, we see that all there is only energy. And this energy alone seems to have mass. And that's why there is the famous energy mass equation, E is equal to mc square. So it is energy that appears as mass. And all bodies of mass are nothing but bundles of energy. And at the level of energy, they are all the same. There is no difference at the energetic level, but the difference is only at the conceptual level. And that is why they do not exist even now. All that exists is just energy. So the same energy that comes together and takes a form disintegrates into a different form. The energy is neither created nor destroyed. All that is changing of forms. Therefore, the all this wisdom is packed in this beautiful verse that Narada says, whether it's we or you, this boy or anybody here, in reality, there is only the energy of the Lord. There is nothing else. So, a simple way to summarize all this is there is nothing here other than the energy of the Supreme Being, which is what we call Prakriti. So, what we call as men and women and people and places and things are nothing but the energy of the Lord. And therefore, if we recognize this, then there is no such thing as birth and death, because the energy of the Lord is eternal and it constantly simply changes forms. Therefore, they say the next verse, this whole chapter is so beautifully powerful. Every verse is packed with so much meaning always when Narada comes. And here we have also the sage Angira. There is so much wisdom. Narada then says, it is Lord alone, the Supreme Being, the unborn, who creates, protects, and destroys things out of himself, by himself, remaining unaffected, unconcerned, just as a child would play with toys. And therefore, those which are created do not have any independence, they are simply dependent on the Lord's energy. All this, again, next verse is so beautiful. This verse, it says, Bhutair Bhutani Bhuteshaha Srijati Avati Hanti Ajaha Atmasrishtair Aswatantrair Anapeksho Api Balavat. The verse is also very poetically beautiful and the meaning is so profound. They say Atmasrishtair, it is created from the very self of the Lord. Aswatantrair, Swatantra means independence. Aswatantrair means therefore the created beings have no independence. They are completely dependent on the energy of the Lord. All there is the energy of the Lord. And the Lord who does so is anapeksha. He is unconcerned, he is indifferent, balavat, like a child. And what he does, he does srijati avati hanti. He creates, he preserves, and he destroys. He is ajaha, unborn, and he does so, and therefore he is called bhuteshaha, Lord of all created beings. So the verse again is Bhutair Bhutani Bhuteshaha Srijati Avati Hanti Ajaha Atmasrishtair Aswatantrair Anapeksho Api Bhalavat. So therefore they say, recognize that it is the Lord who creates, it is the Lord who preserves, it is the Lord who destroys, and it is all out of his own energy. So there is nothing here other than him. He is playing with his own energy, this threefold play of creation, sustenance, and dissolution. And he is unaffected by this play, and therefore do not get caught in the idea of me and mine, and therefore get suffering. Recognize that there is nobody here. That's why they say aswatantrair. There is no independent being, there is no individual. Individual is another meaning of the word independence. Only if there is independence there can be individual. Here it is said that the only independent being is the Supreme Lord, and every created entity is dependent because it is simply the energy of the Lord. So Aswatantrair and Atmasrishtair, created by his own self. So, if you recognize this, then they say, then you will not be in misery. The boy was created, preserved, and dissolved by the same energy of the Lord. And therefore, this happens to every one of us at the destined time. It may be a young child in this case, it may be an old man, whatever it may be, it all happens as destined. And therefore, they say that the the whole process of one body coming together with another body, forming yet another body, that is the mother and the father coming together forming a child, is no different from the seed falling on the ground and then creating another seed. This process is just as in Prakriti, in nature. When we go into the forest, we see this process go on automatically by the Lord's energy. There are seeds, there is soil, some seeds sprout, some seeds don't, and among those which sprout, some grow into tall trees, some die right away. So just like that, he says, bodies come together with bodies to form bodies, and this whole process is a process of nature. And therefore, they say it is only ignorance that makes one think that there is an independent I and mine. This distinction of the body and the soul, that is, this idea of superimposing the sense of me on the body, and thereby thinking that there is an individual me here in this body. This has been there from time immemorial, and this distinction is through ignorance. When one recognizes that the very distinction is false, then one is free. They say, Deha Dehi Vibhago Ayam Aviveka Kritaha Pura. It is through aviveka, through lack of discernment, that one thinks there is a distinction between the body and the separate I, and therefore the I takes ownership of the body and says, I am this body. This distinction is false because there is no separate entity here. The whole movement is the energy of the Lord, and all there is only the energy of the Lord. There is no separate embodied being here. There is only the movement of the energy of the Lord. When these words are heard by Chitraketu, he slowly is able to speak now. He is consoled by these powerful and profound words of the sages. So he looks up, he wipes his face, and he speaks. He is not able to even recognize them because, as we said, he is already partially blinded by the grief, and the sages are also not revealing themselves fully. They have come in the garb of Avadhutas. So he is asking, who are you? You are so wise, your words are so adorable, and you have come here to give me this beautiful wisdom in this time in the garb of ascetics. He says, Kau yuvam jnana sampanna, you are full of wisdom. Avadhutena veshena samagato, you have come in the garb of Avadhuta, that is of renounced ascetics. Then he lists a bunch of people because he is trying to figure out who this is. He knows that these are all the holy sacred beings, Sanat Kumara. He lists Narada right away. He says Narada, Ribhu, Angira, Devala, Vyasa, Markandeya, Gautama, Kapila, all these great beings. He says these are all the beings who go around imparting wisdom out of compassion, and you too are definitely great masters, and you have come here to light the lamp of wisdom for me who's plunged in ignorance. He says, Andhe tamasi magnasya jnanadeepa udiryatam. You've come to light the lamp of wisdom in this dark place that I am in. I am stuck in blindness, in darkness. Literally, also, he is blind now, and figuratively, he is in darkness. So he says, you have come to relieve me out of this darkness. Now, Angira replies, he says, O Chitraketu, I am the same Angira who blessed you with a son when you longed for one, and here has come with me the great divine sage Narada. He says, Aham te putrakamasya putradaha asmi Angira yesha sakshad Narado Bhagavan Rishihi. He says, this is the great Rishi Narada, and we have come here because you are a great devotee of the Lord. You have great culture, because as we saw, he welcomed Angira the last time with great honor, and he is a very pious king, and he only fell for this one desire of having a son, and that gave him so much grief. So Angira says, being a devotee of the Lord, to see you plunged in such grief and despondency, we came here because you are not fit to be drowned in grief, so we have come to shower grace on you. So this is the compassion of the great devotees of the Lord, the great sages, who are always there to bestow the grace of wisdom and devotion and thereby remove suffering. So that is the only intent of all the sages, is to bestow compassion and grace. So they say, Anugrahaya Bhavataha Praptav Avam Iha Prabho. We have come to simply give the grace of the Lord, because Brahmanyo Bhagavad Bhakto na avasiditum arhati. Because you are a true devotee of the Lord and you have always honored the sages, and therefore you ought not to be in suffering. And that's why we have come here to give you this grace. I came, then he says very beautifully, when I came the last time, I came for the same purpose, to impart wisdom, but unfortunately you were not ready for it. You were instead caught in the desire of a son. I came to impart the highest wisdom, but you were insisting on just asking about the lack of having a son, and therefore I had to confer you that boon, and I also told you that it will give you grief, but you went for it. So here an important point is mentioned as an implication that whenever we meet great sages and saints, one ought to ask only for the highest wisdom, and they will impart it so gracefully. As Angira says here, when Angira came the last time, he came to impart the highest wisdom, and Chitraketu ought to have asked him to impart the highest wisdom to teach about self knowledge. Instead, he made a very miserly request of something as ephemeral as having a son. And that's what is seen many times, even today. People go to great sages and they ask for petty things like a job and getting married and having children and all the rest, when in reality, they can impart the wisdom of God, the divine knowledge itself. And therefore, one has to never ask for petty things. And that's what is implied here. Chitraketu asked for that. So Angira says, I was ready to impart it last time, but you did not want it then. But now you've experienced this agony. See, this is how life teaches people. Sometimes one has to go through such experiences to be ready to receive the wisdom. Otherwise, it simply remains a theory. So, this is again why suffering is considered a great teacher. It's so essential, because without this suffering, Chitraketu was not ready for this teaching at all, and he would have fallen on deaf ears had the last time Angira told him all this. So, the right teacher also knows when the student is ready to impart the wisdom. So he says, now you have experienced that the sun is temporary, and understand that everything is the same way. He says, lists everything nicely. He says, wife, house, riches, prosperity, all the objects of sense, glory, kingdom, treasury, ministers, friends, relatives. He says, everything has only one thing in common. They give suffering, delusion, fear, and misery. He says, he lists all of them: Dara, Griha, Rayo, Mahi, Rajyam, Balam, everything. He says, all of them, Sarve api, Shoka, Moha, Bhaya, Artidaha. They give grief, delusion, fear, and misery. This is what they do. And he says they are nothing but like the imaginary cities seen in the sky. He says, Gandharva Nagara Prakyaha. They are like imaginary city. If you can see a city in the sky, and if we build forts in that city, that's exactly what we do with all plans we make for future, with people and things, and everything is temporary. So he says, Gandharva Nagara Prakyaha Swapnamaya Manorataha. They are simply like a dream, and they are an illusion that is occurring in the dream. That's what is the nature of all of them. And then he says, every verse in this chapter is so powerful, directly revealing the highest self knowledge. He says, everything is simply conceptual, as we already saw. He says again, they are all conceptual in that they are perceived, though they have no reality, and they disappear the next moment. He says, Drishyamana vina arthena na drishyante manobhava. So, as we saw, everything is only a concept. In essence, everything is only the energy of the Lord, and it is the concept that makes out of this energy various objects. So when we look at a table or a chair or people or places, it is all product of our knowledge and thinking, and which is necessary, of course, for interacting in this world. The transactional reality of the world requires concepts, and these concepts are essential in order to function sanely in the world, in order to eat, in order to work, in order to drive, in order to do any activity of day to day living. All these concepts are essential. And yet, all of these are only concepts. In other words, they can be taken away any moment, because even now, they are only existing because of what we have projected. So, the same shirt that we perceive as a shirt is not perceived as a shirt by a small insect crawling on it. For the insect, it's simply cotton thread. And similarly, different creatures may perceive the same shirt in a different way. What is there is only the thread, but it is perceived in different ways. It is useful to see it as a shirt, use it as a shirt, but it is also important to recognize that essentially it is only the thread, and it is only a temporary concept. And that is true with all people, all places, all ideas, all nations, all civilizations, and everything. And therefore, when one recognizes this, then we can hold things loosely. It doesn't mean that we completely deny the transactional reality of these things. It just means that we recognize that they are only conceptually real, and we don't hold to them as the ultimate reality. And when we recognize all this, we then see that the only ultimate reality is the Lord's energy and the Supreme Being Himself. Whatever form something takes and disintegrates and changes forms, whatever people, places, things change, the underlying energy is the same. And that underlying energy is the energy of the Supreme Lord. And the only owner of this energy is the one Supreme Being. And therefore, if we recognize this, that our very existence and the existence of all that there is simply the energy of the Supreme Being, who is all there is, then we can rightly rely only on the one truth as our foundation, and everything else can be held loosely. So that's the whole message of Angira and Narada here, which is also the message of Bhagavatam. Bhagavatam uses so many stories and so many ways and expressions to bring home this point out of its wonderful grace. Bhagavatam is not different from Krishna, it is said. And Krishna teaching through Gita and Bhagavatam teaching through all these stories are one and the same. So therefore, he says all of these are only concepts. And when you recognize this, when you recognize that the body, which is made of all the gross elements and senses of perception, organs of action, all of this is simply a source of affliction and misery for the embodied being who considers himself to be identified with the body. As long as the embodied being, which is the false idea of self, recognizes himself as the separate being, I and mine, then he is bound to have suffering. Therefore, he says, investigate with a composed mind the true nature of the self, give up faith in the objective world of duality, and attain peace. Such a beautiful way he concludes this. He says, Tasmat swasthena manasa vimrishya gatimatmanah dvaite dhruvartha vishrambham tyaja upashamam avisha. He says, Dvaita dhruvartha vishrambham tyaja. He says, simply give up this faith in duality, faith in this world of duality, and inquire and recognize that there is only one, which is the pure self, which is the supreme being, and it is his energy which is all there is, and he and his energy are non-different, and therefore the energy of the Lord is simply a modification of the very essence of the Supreme Lord, and therefore all there is only the Supreme Being. And by recognizing this, he says, resort to peace. So this is the instruction for all of us. With this, Chitraketu is given the highest wisdom. Now Narada says, on top of that, go ahead and get purified, because he has to now have a bath and all that with the child, and the child has to be cremated and all the rest. He says, go ahead and do whatever purificatory rites need to be done, and after that, fix your thought on a prayer I am going to teach you, and by focusing on this prayer exclusively for 7 nights, you can behold the Supreme Lord. This prayer is so powerful that by simply holding on to this, so many great devotees have gotten rid of their illusion of duality, and they have been able to attain the unsurpassed Supreme Being, and you also shall do so by taking to this prayer. So now, having given him the supreme wisdom, it is one thing to have the wisdom, but to make it a living reality, one has to get it into his heart. And so Narada, out of his immense compassion, says, I will teach you a prayer which, by repeating it, you can live this wisdom and realize the Supreme Being in 7 short nights. So with this chapter ends. In the next chapter, we will see this beautiful prayer and how Chitraketu takes this prayer and thereby gets liberated out of his misery completely. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.